Okay, so today we're going to talk a little bit about teens, parents, therapy, and sort of the intersection of all of that. My name is Kaleigh Elson. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I work with parents and youth serving professionals to help them better connect with the teens that they care about. And I'm here with Amalia.
Hi, I'm Amalia Miralrío. I am also a licensed clinical social worker, and I work as a therapist in private practice, doing one-on-one work with adults and certainly with parents of teens.
Yeah, and I do workshops and create resources for parents and youth serving professionals. So we thought we would join forces and answer some questions about parents and parenting teens and how all of that intersects. And we actually know each other from college when we were both peer educators. What do you remember from that time, Amalia?
I loved being a peer educator,
Me too.
and it definitely, I'm sure for you was part of why we're in this field now.
Yeah.
It was such an influential experience, and we also had fun. Like it was such a great group. It was such a good like team spirit.
Yeah, definitely. I remember going through like all of the training. So we were peer educators around sexual violence prevention on our campus. And yeah, I learned so much and so many facilitation skills, and definitely is what made me want to be a social worker for sure.
Yeah, and dealing with such like heavy material, I think it was a good experience in seeing how important it is to find others and find joy in the moments when you can.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, well, we've come back together all these years later in our various kind of roles in this work. And let's just get started with our first question, which we're both going to answer these questions and kind of come from our different experiences in the work that we do.
Perfect.
All right. So, our first question was, what are some of the most emotionally difficult parts of being a parent of a teen? Do you want to start?
Sure. I think on a really deep level, the most difficult part that I hear from a lot of parents of teens is how difficult it is to not be needed as much and to be preparing for your teen to leave your home. And that comes with a lot of feelings of loss, even though those feelings aren't always obvious, because there's also such a time of celebration of getting ready to like launch this person into the world and you've prepared them. And so maybe on the surface, someone might first talk about like conflict as the most difficult part, but I would say once we get into it, it's really more like the feelings of loss.
That's such a point. I say this all the time. It's a both and, like it's both exciting and yeah, that grief and loss that you speak to is so tricky to navigate. And I think the things that come to mind for me when I think about like the emotionally difficulties of being a parent of a teen is all of the big things that happen during adolescence that go along with that gaining of more independence that you mentioned. So things like navigating dating and relationships, preparing yourself for whatever those next steps are as like moving into being a young adult and the fears that come up, I think, for a lot of parents of letting go a little bit, letting their teen like take risks and make mistakes, even though that's what adolescence is for, can bring up a lot of fear, I think, for parents as well. And so that's kind of what I think about when I think of that question.
Totally. And then the desire to hold on to some of that control because it is so scary, then I think can lead to more conflict. It just like can spin.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. So, our next question was, how can you tell the difference between an emotional response to a teen versus an emotional response from a parent's own past? And honestly, I feel like you're going to be better equipped to answer this question than I am. So, I can't wait to hear your thoughts on this.
It's a little bit of a trick question because the 2 are, like, so intertwined. It's not necessarily, like, super neat buckets, but I think being a parent, like, every stage of development, it's as if the parent is in a way, like, going through that again themselves of, like, reworking anything that wasn't processed at that stage of development, which is going to be true for everyone. There isn't a perfect development. No one has, like, a perfect life and everything is totally all the way processed. That's just not realistic, and so some of that can be worked out really organically, and some of it feels, like, really sticky, and that's going to be different for each person and what's happening between them and their teen. But I think if you're a parent of a teen and you're feeling like the issues or the challenges of being a parent of that teen are all about your teen, that probably requires more curiosity. It's probably more to think about of what else could be going on because the more you're thinking it's all on the other person, the more likely it is, especially when we're talking about a child, the more likely it is that there's something really painful that is getting stirred up that you need some more help with.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like I have a follow-up question to that that's, like, brewing for me. What are some of those when you say that, Amalia, what would you say are some of the warning signs of that type of situation where it's like, I'm putting all of the sort of blame for the conflict on my teen? What might that look like?
Yeah, so it might sound like they're just manipulating me. They're just not good. I mean, really, like, they're just a bad kid,
Yeah.
or I didn't make things so hard on my parents, like, they're making everything hard on me. They are not respecting me, and that word respect might mean, like, they're not being submissive enough.
Yeah. Yeah, the thing that is coming to mind for me, and this is not exactly answering the question, but it is sort of building off of what you're saying is piece of, like, again, trying to hold on to that control where we see parents oftentimes having really strict boundaries or really maybe even loose boundaries based on their own experiences as a teen. Like maybe I was a wild teen now. I'm putting all these boundaries in place, all these rules and restrictions for my teen so they don't make the same mistakes as I made. Or teenage years were great and easy for me. So here's a wide open space for you to do whatever you want when really we want like something in between where we have reasonable boundaries, realistic expectations, and we're sort of, again, trying to not base what our teens' life is looking like based on our own experiences as a young person. We're different people, even though, we of course have some similarities because this is my kid, but our experiences are not the same because A, we're different people. B, times are different. I see this coming up a lot with social media and like technology stuff where there's either one of those, like the boundaries either too loose or they're too rigid because of, well, if I would have had Instagram when I was a teen, here's what I would have done. We're
Yeah.
personalizing it too much and not recognizing that separation.
Yes, yeah, so in all of those situations you outlined, there's that through line of thinking, "This is what I did, and this is how it should be," and maybe, the when you asked about, like, the red flag, it's kind of like, is there a lack of curiosity?
Mm.
And is it, like, feeling really concrete?
Yeah. I love that idea of getting curious about teens' behavior and about our own our own reactions
Yes.
to teens' behavior too, because
Yeah.
it's both of those things. Like, why am I feeling so triggered, for lack of a better word, about them doing this thing or saying this thing or cutting their hair or wearing that kind of clothes, or, there's so many different things that can come up when teens do have that, a little bit more autonomy than when they're little kids, and parents do have a lot more control over what they do or don't do.
So, the next question, what are some of the most common triggers that can cause parents of teens to have emotional responses from their own past? And I think you started to touch on that, but I'm not sure if you have more examples.
Yeah, common triggers. I think two, kind of two different extremes start to come to mind. One is teens that are starting to like withdraw quite a bit, and maybe it feels secretive when it might be, again, normal adolescent development, where as a teen, I'm talking more to my friends and peers than maybe I am to my parents or caregivers. Totally developmentally appropriate, but can sometimes be triggering for parents and caregivers. And the other piece, I think, is that acting out. Like, if we see teens like taking risks that are maybe really more risky, putting themselves in harm's way, maybe using drugs or alcohol, or, driving recklessly, like kind of using some of that independence and autonomy as a teen to kind of take some of those risks. I think that that can also be really triggering, again, for parents who are thinking like, well, when I was a teen and I was, using drugs or alcohol, here's all the risky situations I put myself in, and I want to try and avoid that for my teen. Totally understandable. Or, when I was holed up in my room, not talking to my parents, here's the things that I was doing or thinking or worrying about. And that can start to bring up a lot of things, I think, for parents.
Yes, definitely. I would add to that anything that has to do with sexuality,
Yeah.
that this is such a time of coming into one's own sexuality, and that is really loaded with cultural meaning. It's really loaded. It could have religious significance in your house, or maybe it did for you as a teen and you're trying to do things differently. I think a lot of parents are not super happy with the way that their parents handled their own sexuality when they were teens. Some, not always. I mean, but I think for the generation of teens now, I think culturally things are different and hopefully more open, but that doesn't mean it's not still intimidating. And so I think if a parent has the idea, I don't like the way it was handled for me, I want to do it differently, but they don't know exactly what that means, that can be disorienting.
Definitely.
And there might be stuff that hasn't, that's still lingering from their adolescence of how they were coming into their sexuality, and now they're tasked with supporting their child with that process.
And that's such a tricky thing to work through even as an adult, and
Yes.
layering on, like, parenting in that context is so complex.
Definitely. Yeah, it is, and like we said earlier, it's not like there's this firm line of what's your teen's issue and what's your issue. It just sort of all comes together, and, you're using your life experiences to inform the way you're parenting, but if it didn't go super well for you at that stage, then it's gonna be more
Are
difficult.
difficult. Yeah. It's so interesting you bring that up. I have a workshop that I do on relationships and sexuality and identity formation for teens, and we always do an exercise at the very beginning where I say, "Okay, so what did caring adults in your life tell you about sex, relationships, identity when you were a teen?" And the answers are what you would expect. It's nothing. Don't have sex till you're married, only can be in relationship with someone of the opposite gender, and don't get pregnant. Are basically the things that the adults report that they were told. And then we think about, well, what do you wish the supportive adults in your life would have told you? And that list is so long and so complex, and there's so many insightful things that people think of. And it's translating that then into exactly what you said. Like, how do I navigate that with the teen in my life? How do I fill the gap that I didn't have as a young person and give them the skills and information and support that they need, which is so tricky.
I love that exercise that you described. And it's really, really so concretely highlighting why parents might have fear about their teens having more independence when they were taught these messages of fear. And we say all the time in therapy, like whatever is not like understood and brought to the front of your mind, it just gets repeated. And if you were taught sex is scary and bad and don't do it, or if you have to do it, only do it in this one way, it's even if you don't want to pass that on to your teen, which I would guess most people who are choosing to attend your workshops don't want to.
Right.
They're coming in motivated to do something differently. And same with people who tend to come into therapy, right? Like if you're listening to this or reading this, like you're you're motivated, you probably already are coming in with that curiosity, but it's so difficult not to just repeat what you know.
Absolutely. It's a really tough break those patterns or try something different. And there's sometimes a comfort in doing what you know or what you experience. And the unknown right? It can be a little bit,
Totally.
more nerve wracking even than maybe something that wasn't so great that you're comfortable with. Yeah. I feel like that's a really nice segue into our next question, which is what types of fears or worries about parenting teens do you typically hear from parents? And a few of them already.
Yeah, so you talked about the fear of reckless behavior and, fear of your teen doing something that's unsafe or that like really harms them. I think those are some of the worst case scenarios for any parent to be thinking about, of course. Those are really scary things to be thinking about. But there's also fears about like what kind of person your teen's going to become. And are they going to share the same values that you have? Are they going to be able to be a person who can make it on their own and can be independent and successful on their own? And, so on the one hand, there's a fear of will they be, you know, too unsafe and too independent? And then on the other hand, it's will they like be able to launch and have successful independence. And both of those at once is tough.
For a lot of our current teens who went to school, were in middle or high school or even elementary school during COVID, I hear a lot of fears around like lack of social skills, like in person.
Mm.
Specifically, people mean in person social skills. They don't mean other types. So there's so many different types of social skills. But I think that what I hear a lot is like, how like are they gonna be living at home forever? Or it's exactly what I said. Are they gonna be able to launch into the world because they had this time of their lives, a really like pivotal time of their lives when they were yes, couldn't go out, were on screens all day because they were going to school or interacting with friends, in digital spaces. And I, I do a lot of work around like healthy social media use for teens. So of course, that's like the number one fear that I'm asking.
Yeah.
It's like, how do I keep my teen safe online? And this push and pull of like protection versus like giving independence and freedom, it shows up so clearly in that conversation because if we ban teens from using their cell phones or using social media, what I find that they typically find a way around it and then they don't have the skills they need to navigate those spaces in a safe way. So that's something that I, can get out of soapbox about pretty easily and talking with like the realistic and reasonable boundaries and expectations and exactly what you said about trying to help them live out their values in those spaces. So that you said that fear of like, well, will they hold on to these values that we've tried to develop a family outside of the family, outside of our home? And they test that out, I think, a lot in online. Like, how do you want to, who do you want to be? And it helps, I think, when parents and families remind their teens of those values and what do they want their values to be in the family and as an individual.
Yeah, and as you were talking about COVID and what might have been missing at different developmental marks for different teens, I was also thinking that testing of separation was also missing for the parents, that they were also delaying some of that by having their child closer more frequently. And so together, but the pair or the whole family unit was sort of not getting to experiment and play with separation in the same way.
Such a good point. I had not even thought about that. Yeah. So they have these teens who are like getting years and years older and they're all at home, like together. And then it's a little bit more jarring when they're like trying to go out and be more independent. And yeah,
Like, where did this come from?
like we were all at sick home for years, years on end, months on end, trying to stay safe. And now they're trying to run away from me, which would feel very kind of out of the blue.
Yeah, totally.
A lot of time. What a time that was. We're still recovering, clearly.
Think it's really gonna be a long time until we really understand the developmental impacts of that time. I think for all of us, like, I think it just changed developmental trajectories, and I don't say that to sound scary, though, like, we're also, like, human nature, like, we're very resilient, and we can process, and we can think about it, but I think it's gonna take a long time to really understand how to think about it. So, what are some of the skills or strategies that you would recommend for parents of teens to help them navigate all of this?
They and you said this before, and I totally agree. It is a getting curious piece, trying to step away from the fear a little and ask questions, get curious, and try to join your teen in whatever the thing is that they're into. It's so funny. I, of course, was scrolling on Instagram as one does. And the actress Busy Phillips posted this really interesting clip of her talking about how she had to learn about YouTube and, oh gosh, what was the other platform that her teens were really into? It doesn't actually matter, but how to stay connected with her teens. She had to join them in some of these spaces that she was just not interested in. And I think that is a great strategy for parents of teens, whatever the thing is that your teen is into, if it's, gaming, if it's fashion, if it's sports, if it's theater, if it's whatever the thing is, asking them about it, getting involved in it in a way that is not overbearing, but this shows that you're interested in them, I think can really, really go a long way. And I talk about that a lot with social media too. Like, who are the influencers you like to follow? Like, what accounts do you like? What do you like about Snapchat that is so fun for you? Getting joining them in whatever the world is that they're living in, I think is a really great strategy to maintain a connection while also kind of like letting them have the thing that is interesting.
That's beautiful. Yeah, because it's like if you're so used to there being a certain way that you connect with your child, I mean, we're thinking like pre-adolescent child, it can feel like I said earlier, like such a big loss to not be able to reach out to them in the same way and find them in the same way. And that can be so hard and, can start that cycle of wishing to have more control. And that's so different from what you're saying, which is having, a process of like mourning and, letting go of like, yeah, it's, maybe really sad that those days are gone. It's okay to feel, your feelings are your feelings, but that there's also so much waiting on the other side of being more flexible and open with finding new ways to connect. It's like you're, you're I think as a parent, it's like constantly like re-meeting this person as they develop. Like, and like that is a lot more fun sounding than, trying to grasp onto control and keep things the same, which of course no one is doing that because they enjoy it. They're doing it because they think it's the only option.
Yeah. I love that framing of it too. Like how exciting to get to. I think about this. I have a little kid right now, and I think about that all the time. Like, who are you? And like, what are you? And what are you gonna like? What are you interested in? That doesn't end when they get to be a certain age. We're all
Totally.
developing our personalities and our interests and our, who we are in the world forever. And it's a great way to think about, getting to know that your teen over and over again.
Totally. Yeah, and I would add to that answer to answer that question of what parents can do is to seek their own therapy. This is a time when if you're finding yourself feeling really intensely when you're trying to parent and you maybe don't quite understand why, you are someone who is a curious and open person. There could be something that's happening that you're not totally aware of or you're not aware of at all, and therapy is a great place to explore that.
I hear about parents being encouraged to seek therapy like when they have little kids because those early years can be so intense, but I don't hear it talked about as much for parents of teens, and those years are also really intense in a different way.
Yeah, I think there's kind of a cultural narrative that like teens are just hard and that you should just be okay with that and kind of like dismiss any feelings that that brings up and just be like, yeah, it's just hard and
But
just
you're all
power through
whole.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
That's
that's yeah, it's not actually like very compassionate towards yourself. It's like it doesn't help the teen to frame them to frame to frame teens as awful is not very kind, but like, to towards yourself of like, well, there are real challenges. This is a really big transition, and why wouldn't that bring things up for you?
absolutely. Yeah. Well, and I think that's a perfect segue into our last question that we had, which was if a parent is pursuing their own therapy for whatever reason, sh- they talk about that with their teen, and if yes, what should that conversation include?
I would actually be really curious to hear your answer first on that one.
Thought we through is a licensed therapist who doesn't practice as a therapist. I was thinking about this, and I think yes, they should talk about it. That's my gut reaction.
Okay.
I'm also really curious to hear what you think, and I do think that they should be really mindful of what the conversation includes. Like, you don't want to leave therapy and then rehash the entire conversation with your teen. For words, that conversation is for you to work out with your therapist, and there's definitely going to be things that you probably don't want to share. But I think normalizing seeking therapy, talking about mental health, that's super important to talk about with a lot, whoever the safe people in your life are, including, members of family or teen in particular. Just so like, yeah, sometimes I really struggle with feeling depressed or feeling anxious or whatever the thing might be. And yeah, I'm talking to a therapist. It's really helping me or it's not helping me or here's my reactions to it and maybe sharing some tidbits of like here's a coping strategy that I learned in therapy, or here's a strategy that I'm trying, or here's a different way of thinking that my therapist kind of helped me come to. Those are the types of things that I can imagine of him with 15.
Okay. Yeah. I think my answer would be yes, as long as you can hold yourself to those boundaries that you've already laid out. Like, if you are not sure that you can contain, and if you start to talk about it, you're going to spill it all in a way that's not contained, I would say it's better to keep it private for now. But if you are able to organize it in a way that is digestible for your teen, if you're able to say, all of those things that you said of like, it's totally okay to get support. I get support. I'm learning coping skills, or, it's helped me feel less anxious, or, those little tidbits. I think that's beautiful. My only hesitation to say yes immediately was just if you're having a lot of conflict, if it will come across to the teen as like, you have made me need therapy because you are so difficult, or if you feel like you're not sure how to talk about it in a way that is boundaried, then wait, maybe. Like, you can get there. I think about the difference between like privacy versus secrecy. And I think the way and the contents of what you're really diving into in therapy might not be appropriate to totally share. That might need to be private. But it doesn't mean that the therapy itself has to be a secret, because I love what you said about like destigmatizing. Like, yes, it's totally okay to get help and to take care of your emotional and psychological well-being just like you do the rest of you.
You got such good points. Yes, I totally see a situation where like you're in a conflict and you're like, therapy like, until those stuff like that would not be productive or helpful at all.
And it might feel true. It might feel like this is the truth, but like, yeah, not hopeful.
Yes.
Yeah.
Talk about that with your therapist.
Yes.
Have the space for you to like say whatever it is you need to say and process those things. And I love that distinction of secrecy versus privacy. I don't think that is talked about nearly enough. It's okay to keep some things private, and that doesn't mean that you're being disingenuous or lying or anything like that. We all deserve to have some pieces that we hold to ourselves or hold until we're ready to share them or have processed them appropriately before we spill them onto somebody else or maybe say something that we don't.
Totally. And then the very last question was about what positive changes do you typically see in parent-teen relationships when parents work on their own emotional growth? And I can say very clearly that the more a parent is understanding themselves and getting help and support, and yeah, having a space, if you need to just be angry and say mean things, that's fine. You can say that to your therapist, to have us, and then you do the understanding and the processing of like what's really going on. But you can speak very candidly. It doesn't need to be polite
Yeah,
in the privacy of a therapy room. And that I think that helps parents be more patient when they are doing the parenting, that they are not totally like overwhelmed and ready to burst with all of the feelings that they've been holding.
absolutely. I can imagine too doing some of that work of recognizing like, oh, that thing triggers me because of X, Y, Z.
Mhm.
And when you're in that moment, having that awareness of like, oh, I'm probably feeling this way because, whatever I figured out with my therapist and sort of sacred space where you can process things and say what you need to say. The thing that I'm wondering too is in terms of positive changes to see in the parent team relationship, I wonder if there's an opportunity there for like just increased trust. Sometimes when you find that right balance of, again, like having realistic and appropriate boundaries, but giving a little bit of space for teens to, explore who they are, make some mistakes that are, safe enough. Like you're reducing the risk, but you're not like holding them back so much that they can't take some risks or explore things a little bit. That actually creates a little bit more space for trust to build between a parent and a teen, for a teen to maybe come to them and say, like, I did mess up, or I need help, or what do you think, or what would you have done? And that's really exciting and awesome. I think that back when I was a teen, like, I wish I would have had that level of trust and comfort. I think a lot of teens, despite how they might be behaving or acting out some of their feelings on their family or on their parents, that having that safe space is ultimately something that I think a lot of teens want to have.
Yes, I completely agree. Teens do want to be able to go to their parents. They just want to be able to do it on their own terms. But but they do want that. I really believe that. And that the more that they see that their parent is able to process their own feelings, and the more that they see that a parent is like sturdy, and the more they're going to feel like, okay, my parent will be able to tolerate my feelings. They will It's not going to be the thing that causes them to like totally break down or have an explosion or of anger, or like whatever the big feeling is, that if you as a parent have the support to be able to process what you are feeling, then your teen will know that, they will feel that, they will sense, okay, I can say this hard thing. I can disclose that, yeah, I did this thing that I know they're not going to like. And I know that my parent will be able to tolerate it, even if they feel something about it.
Absolutely. And what a wonderful skill to learn as a parent and as a person. Like, yeah, like taking it in and knowing that you're having a reaction to it, but still showing up for your teen in that moment in the way that they need.
Totally.
Parenting is complicated.
Yes. Yes.
Shout out to all the parents out there, especially
Yes.
see you're doing the work, and we see you.
Absolutely. That's a great ending note.
Very awesome. Alia, do you want to say maybe like where folks can find you and kind of what kind of services or availability that you have in your work?
Sure. So I offer in-person sessions near downtown Detroit for individual therapy for adults. I also can offer online sessions to anyone in Michigan or Pennsylvania. And the best way to reach me is through my website, which is amitydetroitcounseling.com.
So, yeah, and for me, I'm available for speaking engagements. Interactive workshops is the majority of the work that I do with youth serving professionals in any type of setting. So, therapy practices, roles. So, for teachers, community based organizations, healthcare workers, anyone who works with teens. I've worked with you and would love to provide any type of professional development and training. And same for parents of teens. So you are on a parent teacher organization, or your school district or school does parent education nights. That's my bread and butter. So I'd love to work with you. And you can find me at my website, k-cornelsen.com. And I'll put the spelling of that in the description. And I also have a bi-weekly newsletter called Both And. So embracing both the joys and the challenges of the teen years. So that's both ends.